So I'm going to run through how to make your own onion powder at home. Basically, you can use an oven or a dehydrator being the preferred method. So I usually look for a good deal on like a 10-pound bag of onions because that's what will fit in my dehydrator. So this was $1.99 for 10 pounds of small onion, at kind of the end of the season bargain. So with small onions, they're kind of like peeling eggs. They're a little more tedious, but it took about 40 minutes or so, and I just worked my way through it. I had 3 bowls set up, as you can see, and you usually do tear up for the first 10-15 minutes, maybe even take a break. But then after that, kind of your eyes get used to it, and it's not as bad. But whatever method you choose to peel your onions, larger ones, some people cut them in half, but the small ones, you just kind of take the ends off and make a slice down the center and just peel them off. I did run into, I think, 2 or 3 onions that were kind of a little bit sketchy, so I didn't use those. And that's normal for pretty much any bag of onions you buy. Sometimes you get some that are a little bit overripe or starting to go. So yeah, so work your way through it. This is kind of the tedious part of this whole process. The rest is easy. The good thing about homemade onion powder is the flavor is, to me, a lot more noticeable. You can control how sweet or how kind of oniony the end result is, and I'll show you that in a minute. But there you can see the finished bowl of peeled onions. Now I'm going to show you 3 methods of slicing the onions. The first is an old classic KitchenAid with a hopper attachment on the front, and then inside of that hopper you put whatever slicer attachment goes inside, and then you kind of lock it down. So this one's just a basic slicer. And it works okay. It's not my favorite method. I'll show you that in a minute. But it works fine if you set it on medium-high to high speed and just keep feeding your onions through. It does a decent job of slicing them. It takes a bit of pressure on the hopper to push it down and get them through the machine, and eventually it comes out. Sometimes it gets stuck a bit, but it's okay. It does the job. So I'm just kind of demonstrating this method. I didn't actually use it for the entire process, but anyone that does have this attachment, feel free to use it. So the main thing you're looking for is to have a nice thin slice of onion. The thinner the better, because in your dehydrator the airflow needs to get around the slices, and if it's thick it's going to take longer to get that moisture content out. So try to get them as thin as you can. The traditional method here is to just hand slice them all. It doesn't actually take that long, so feel free to do that. And this is my favorite method, just an old food processor with a top blade slicer attachment. Fits in like that. And it works very fast. Once you get it going, just feed your onions in. Now these are regular cooking onions. It didn't say yellow onions on the bag, but they're not sweet. They're just regular cooking onions, nothing special. So for just onion powder, I don't think you need to spend a lot on specialty onions. That's up to you though, if you want to do Vidalia or something like that. But just a regular cooking onion works the best for this process. And again, you can control the end result, how brown it's going to be and how sweet it's going to be. So I'll show you that a little later on. So there you can see it's pretty finely sliced, and that's kind of ideal. So that's why I tend to use the food processor as opposed to the other methods. So there you go. And just continue on. Once you're done, this is what I do. I tend to compress it down and try to get as much kind of juice out of the water content out of the onion, and leave it in the bottom of the bowl. So I use a potato masher. So what I do here is I put down a baking sheet and then this is one of the trays from the dehydrator, and I just lay them out. The reason I have a tray underneath is to catch any bits and also any drippings, and that becomes important later on, you'll see. So it's important when you lay all this out, you leave some air pockets in between, so don't, you see how there's a space in between the onion here and there? That's important because you want the airflow to go through the whole machine and do its thing. Here you can see the kind of the last batch, and it's obviously full of the water content from being compressed. So I just run it through a fine metal strainer here and use that same baking tray to catch all the onion fluid. Some people will use that onion juice for their cooking, and that's fine for a soup or whatever you need to do. And then I just compress it and get as much water as you can out of there. The machine's going to do most of the work for you, so just try to get as much water as you can out of it, but don't worry too much. I always try to keep things as easy as possible and not overwork it or overthink it. Again, we're talking a $2 bag of onions here, so it's not a big deal if things go wrong. Okay, so this is my final tray. There's a couple of chunks here and one goes flying. But spread it out again, leave some open spaces in between for the air to flow around. And I'm going to add that last tray to the machine. And this dehydrator I am going to put in the garage. Now I would recommend putting it in a place where you don't mind the smell being in that room. So the garage, I actually moved my vehicle out of the garage for 24 hours basically, because the initial part of the dehydrating, it off gases the onions and you get quite a strong smell of onion. Later on it kind of mellows down a bit, but here you can see I'm setting it to 12 hours and the temperature is 125 Fahrenheit. You can go a little bit higher, but I wouldn't recommend going too high. Kind of go low and slow, and you'll see why in a minute. So as it dehydrates, you're going to see what's called partial caramelization. So the onions will generally turn a pinkish color. And if you were to put onions in a frying pan, you might see that pink color a bit before it caramelizes and turns brown. So if you were to dry at a higher temperature, say in the oven at 170 or so, you're going to get to that kind of have that pink stage, but kind of quickly get to that brown stage. So I like to go low and slow. It also is good for flavor development. But there you can see there's quite a bit of pink color. So that's called partial caramelization. Okay, so after 20 hours, so I did 12 hours, but there was still some kind of moist bits in there, so I went for another 8 hours just overnight, and in the morning this is kind of the result. So it's really different with every batch. Here you can see I'm taking the screen off and just kind of emptying it into a large bowl, and then from there you judge, you know, is there any moisture content left, and if there is, you must take care of that because you don't want to store onion powder that has any moisture content because you will get some mold and you don't want that. So we want it completely dry before we do storage. So here I'm just kind of working the contents and seeing if there's any kind of soft bits, and there was. So you'll see in the next step I decided to put it in the oven just to kind of complete the drying process. So I could have went longer as well in my dehydrator, but whatever you need to do to get completely dry, it's really important. So I have 2 baking sheets with non-stick. These are actually Teflon coated fiberglass sheets that you see available. You can also use parchment paper or whatever method you use. You just don't want them sticking to the actual sheet. So spread them out. So I decided to do 225 degrees for 30 minutes. You could go shorter than that. It really depends on your oven. Now you don't want to do it too long because you're going to go end up kind of caramelizing them too much or actually burning them. So you don't want the burnt flavor because you could spoil your whole batch. So I just went kind of a lower medium heat just for 30 minutes. So keep an eye on them too. If you find that after maybe 15-20 minutes you're satisfied with it, take it out. But again, you want them completely dry. You don't want any water content left in your pieces of onion. So here I'm running my hand through again, making sure it's nice and crispy. And although it looks fairly dark, it's a bit of the lighting. I compared it to the store-bought onion powder that I have in the next day. I kind of compared the two, and it's almost the same color once you're said and done with grinding. So here you can see it goes back into the food processor once it's completely dry. And we're going to run that. You can pulse it, you can let it run, whatever you need to do to get it down to the typical consistency of onion powder. And you can see it takes quite a bit of processing to get it down to where you like it, but just keep going with it and run a spoon through and just make sure that it's going to be proper consistency. So this just needs to be processed a little bit more, which I did. I'm going to show you another method here. So this is a blender, and I've put the rest of the batch in here to show you a different method. This tends to work a little bit better. The higher end blenders like Ninja or Vitamix, they do a really good job of kind of blending things into a very fine consistency, almost flour-like. So they're very powerful, but you have to be careful too that you don't want to go too far and make it into almost a flour. So again, you're pulsating or running out of speed. That's you just got to keep an eye on it. So this is just a regular Vitamix, and we're gonna, I think, pulse it a few times and then run it. So either way, whatever you have to do to get it down into the consistency you want. And here it's pretty powdery, and you're going to end up with a few chunks, which I'll show you how to take care of in a second here. So the first thing I do is just run a whisk through it, kind of try to break up the bigger chunks. And then I have a type of potato masher or just a masher. Whatever you need to do to get rid of those chunks. You could even run it through the blender again if you want, but you know, just whatever you have to do to get rid of those chunks. So I tend to use glass jars or similar. You can use plastic as well, no big deal. The thing I do recommend, and you'll see it in other videos too, is to add a bit of rice. So uncooked rice will help to kind of withdraw any remaining moisture, and it does somewhat help to stop from caking. So sometimes your mixture will turn solid. So by adding the rice, you know, half teaspoon to a teaspoon, depending on the amount, obviously, it does help to keep it fluid and draw out any additional moisture. Because the worst thing you can have is, after all that work, is to have some mold growing on your mixture because of any water remaining. So very important to get it very dry. Takes a bit of work, but once you get used to it, it's fine. Has a lot more flavor than regular onion powder, and I tend to like it a little bit darker than lighter. The lighter is going to give you a stronger onion flavor, and the darker is going to give you more of a sweet onion flavor. So there you go. Thanks for watching, everyone. Please subscribe for upcoming videos. Thank you.